Hi everybody. Today we are going to be talking about four topics: copyright, fair use, OER, and attribution, and why as educators we care about all four of these. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to talk about is copyright. What is it, and why and how should we apply it to education? This is a little bit of a complicated question in that we need to dig into this a little bit. So to start with, let's actually open up copyright law from the US government and see what it says for us. Okay, now this page is just an FAQ of general information about copyright, and in essence what it's saying is copyright, as I think we know, is a form of protection that is granted by law for original works of authorship. So things that somebody creates are under copyright law. And one thing to keep in mind is, number one, if something is not published, it can still be copyrighted. So if it is still in the unpublished stage, it can still be copyrighted. And the other thing to keep in mind is that a patent is different than copyright is. Copyright protects original works of authorship. A patent protects inventions or discoveries. So knowing that as people create things, they are copyrighted is important to remember, especially in education. Can we use anything that we want? The answer is no. We need to pay attention to copyright. But there are a few tools that will help us to determine if something is copyrighted and how to best determine if or how we can use it. So let's go back to the presentation. Now, one thing that can help us with figuring out if we can use something that is copyrighted is something called fair use. Now, fair use is a legal doctrine that looks at four questions to help us determine whether we can use this copyrighted material. And the four questions deal with purpose, nature, amount, and effect. So let's take a look a little closer at, again, going to the US government for their page on what fair use can do for us and what these four questions really mean. Okay, so here you can see they break down these four categories that they'll be looking at. The purpose and character of the use. So they look at whether this is being used commercially or it's for nonprofit and educational purposes. That's a big one. What is the purpose of this? What are you using it for? The second one is, what is the nature of the copyrighted work? To what degree is this creative expression, like a movie or a song, in terms of what is the creativity of this? The third one, and you hear a lot about this one, is the amount that you're going to use. So how much of that copyrighted work are you using, looking at the whole of it? So is it a large portion of it, or are you using just a very small amount? That's a third consideration. And the last one is, what is the effect that you using this would have on the potential market value of the copyrighted work? So to what extent would using this harm the existing or future market for the copyright owner's original work? Could it cause harm to them? So these are the four things that you would kind of have to ask yourself in terms of, can I use this copyrighted work? Now, this may seem a little complicated, but there are tools to help you to determine how you fall under each of these four categories. So let's head back to the presentation and I'll introduce that to you. Okay, this tool is a fair use evaluator. It's a website that will actually walk you through several steps that will kind of help you answer these four questions and determine, really critically thinking about how you fall under those four categories. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at this, and I'll open this just so you can see it in just a second. Very easy to use. It will give you at the end of it a PDF kind of printout of how you answered each question, so you have a record of how you answered questions about these four categories. So let me just show you that. Okay, so this is the tool that I am showing you, and this is the button that you would click in order to make an evaluation of the resource that you want to use. And again, it's very easy to use, walks you right through those four questions. I also want to bring your attention to this down here at the bottom. I just want you to keep note of it because I'm going to come back to this idea of what this symbol means and how it can be helpful to us. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, if the idea of copyright and trying to figure out if you can use it under the fair use doctrine seems complicated, there's another option. There are something called open education resources, and these resources are exactly what they sound like. They are open to educators to use, and they are found in all sorts of different places that allow you to use, and you can see these 5 R's up here. You can reuse them, revise them, remix them, redistribute them, and retain them. And these are the 5 R's you're looking for because you want to share them with others. You might want to change them in some way. You might want to hold on to them, and so on. These open education resources do a lot for education in terms of giving us tools and resources that we can share with students, that we can use in our teaching and our learning. There are a lot of helpful sites that can help you find these resources. I'm going to go to OER Commons and show you this one first, just to give you an idea of what these resources look like and how you can find materials to use in your classroom. So let's head here now. Okay, so now that we're here, we can see that this is listed as a public digital library of open education resources. So that's what we're looking for. Here, we have several ways to search on individual items we're looking for. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to choose that we are going to look at the election process. I'm going to leave the rest of these blank and just take a look here. Now, when I search for this, what's going to pop up are a lot of different options over here and a lot of different ways to filter on these resources here. We can look at a specific material type if I'm looking for a lecture or a lesson plan or a simulation or so on. Over here on the right are all of the options that came up based on what we searched on, and of course that will change if we filter further. Here you can see this one is a unit of study, this one is a lecture, this one is a module, and so on. The other thing you'll notice, and I could click on here and dig down a little deeper, but the other thing that you'll notice is over here there are a series of symbols and letters. This is a license that is put on each of these individual items. CC stands for Creative Commons, and those licenses allow for a mix of options that you can do with that resource. So here you can see that this particular license says conditional remix and share is permitted. This one, with different symbols, says only sharing is permitted. Now, depending on how the author chose to license it, gives you specific rights. If you're not sure what that license means in its entirety, this little blue icon, if you roll over it, will tell you. This prohibits commercial use. It's open to use, share, and change for non-commercial use. You must provide attribution to the original author, and we'll talk about attribution in a minute. But these Creative Commons licenses you'll see on all of these open education resources as a way for the author to tell you what you're allowed to do. And this will be important when you give attribution to the author. This is listed as well to make sure that we know, everybody knows what you're allowed to do with this material. So look for those licenses as well as the materials when you're in open education resources. So since we talked about attribution, let's head back and talk about that in a little more detail. All right, the next slide talks about, now that you've found this open education resource you love, how do you give credit to the author and to the source? So this acronym, TASL, stands for Title, Author, Source, and License. And the way you give attribution is to list as many of those as you possibly can. So down here I have an example. This was taken from a site called Flickr that has Creative Commons images. You can see my attribution here is Statue of Liberty, and this link will go directly to the image by the author. What the source is, Flickr, goes right to the website, and what it's licensed under. And these sites will list those for you and show you what Creative Commons license it's under. And it is an important piece to link to that as well. So you can see right off the bat when you click on it what you're allowed to do with that image. Now before we wrap up, I just want to make a quick note that even in this presentation, attribution and that idea of TASL was used. So here's an image and attribution. Image and attribution. And even here for this site, since it was Creative Commons licensed, there's a link here to that Creative Commons license so you can see where that came from. And same here for this attribution. So it is important to remember to give those attribution where you're using resources that have been openly shared with others. So this is the presentation on copyright, fair use, OER, and attribution. I hope you were able to grab some information from it and helped you to learn more about this in terms of education.